All right, guys, time to have a little bit of an uncomfortable but nevertheless necessary discussion about the Seattle Seahawks. Time to go into a topic that many Seahawks fans are starting to broach with the way this year is going. We're going to talk a little bit about Shane Waldron, and what we're going to talk about in this video is both potentially unfortunate and a very necessary side effect of having a good football team. We're talking about the possibility of Shane Waldron, our second year offensive coordinator, not being here in 2023. Now, the reason why I say it's necessary to having a good team is that the reason why we're having this conversation is not because we're going to fire him because he's bad. No. We're having this conversation because he might get a head coaching gig somewhere in the NFL because he's doing really good. The Seahawks offense currently ranks fourth in the NFL through these first 9 weeks in points per game. They are one of 5 offenses averaging more than 26 points a game. They are literally the first team on the board after the big 3, Chiefs, Bills, Eagles. You take out those 3 juggernaut offenses, Seattle's at the top. Not near the top, they are at the top. Now in yards, they're 11th, which is not tremendous, but that also indicates great efficiency and a lack of turnovers and taking advantage of your opportunities. So that's not bad either. So Waldron has done really well this year with an offense that has a lot of good players, has a lot of talent, but it is starting 2 rookies at tackle. It does have a veteran journeyman quarterback, and yet we're getting these results. So teams are going to look at that and go, that guy might be a good head coaching hire. Maybe he should be our head coaching hire. And he is currently 43. Shane Waldron is 43, going to turn 44 in August next year. So if he became a head coach next year, he would be 44 when coaching his first ever game as head coach. Sean McVay was 30 when he got hired, and he's currently, 30, 35. So age is not going to be something that hinders Waldron. Teams hire young coaches like that on a semi-frequent basis these days. 44 is not even that young. So, quite simply, is Shane Waldron going to find himself coaching for another team in 2023 because his performance this year warrants it? We see teams pick up coordinators after they have one big year, like Brandon Staley was a good example. So a lot of people are concerned that we may lose Waldron this offseason and lose a lot of this offense. But let's think about which teams might actually do that. So, which teams are going to need a new head coach next year? How many openings are there going to be? That's the pertinent question here, because obviously Waldron's ability to get interviews is going to be heavily influenced by how many teams are doing interviews. So let's take a look at the NFL right now and try to get an idea of how many openings there are going to be. And this is part of the reason why I'm actually fairly optimistic about being able to keep Shane Waldron, despite the great results so far this year from his offense, and despite the fact that we have seen in recent history coordinators get head coaching gigs very quickly after having a good start to their career. Okay, so let's just go down the list of teams and talk it out here. AFC East. No team in here is going to need a new head coach, I don't think. I think all these teams have head coaches that are safe. NFC East, definitely not the Giants, definitely not the Eagles. If the Cowboys flame out, I guess maybe they could can McCarthy, but Jerry Jones is the same guy who kept Jason Garrett for a decade, so I kind of feel like he would just stick it out until there's a gun to his head. And they might not flame out, so I'm going to say the Cowboys, they're fine. The Commanders, maybe, but they're honestly not that bad. They're 4-5. They don't have a quarterback. Ron Rivera is probably fairly safe at the moment, unless the team sells. If the Commanders sell, then that's a different conversation, because then the new owner might come in and say, I want my guy. I don't want the previous guy's guy. I want the opportunity to get my own head coach in place. But unless that happens, I don't think anybody in the NFC East is going to get fired. Okay, AFC North. Maybe if the Bengals miss the playoffs, but it's the Bengals, so probably not even then. Not the Ravens, unless Harbaugh leaves of his own accord. Browns, they're good. The Steelers aren't going to fire Tomlin for one bad season. They don't fire coaches for much of anything most of the time. So Tomlin's safe. So not the AFC, nothing in the AFC North. NFC North, Bears, Eberflus is in his first year and he's doing okay. Kevin O'Connell's good. I don't believe that the Packers are going to bail after one bad season on a guy who's been really good to start his career for the Packers. The Lions are the only possible team, but I don't know. I think they like what Campbell's doing. At the very least, they like the foundation he's laying. Maybe he's not the guy to actually lead them to greatness, but maybe they feel like he's the guy to get things started, kind of like what Singletary was before Harbaugh. So I think he's okay. AFC South. Okay, here we go. Here we have some real possible openings. Not the Titans. Vrabel's fine. Jaguars, Doug Peterson just got there and he's cleaning up a big mess, so I think he's fine. We know for a fact the Colts are going to need a coach. We know for a fact the Colts are going to need a coach because they already fired Frank Reich. Houston, I don't know. My first impression was Lovie Smith is a one-year caretaker and they're going to get another coach next year. I was talking with the Hawks Nest the other day about this, though, and he felt very, very confident that Lovey's going to get a second year. So maybe Houston, maybe not. NFC South, this is where things get kind of interesting. This is where things can get mixed up a little bit. The Panthers definitely need a coach because they already fired Matt Rule. The Saints and Buccaneers are two interesting teams. They have first-year coaches, although they both have previous head coaching experience, first-year coaches with these teams, and they're both massively underachieving. They're both massive disappointments. Do they hold that against the coach and decide to move on? Maybe. I actually kind of doubt it. I've said this before. The default modus operandi for most NFL franchises is don't rock the boat unless you have to. Don't fire the coach unless you really just, it's so obvious it needs to happen. Cling on to him until there is no more hope left. There are exceptions, of course, like the Eagles have shown a willingness to move on from a coach when they suspect that it may not be working, like they did with Doug Peterson after really one bad season. They fired Chip Kelly after a half-decent career as a coach. Like, they moved on from him after 3 years when the 3 years were not particularly bad. So the Eagles are a team that is willing to be proactive here, but most teams are not. So if the Saints do decide to move on from Dennis Allen, I don't know if they try to get Sean Payton to come back. I don't know if he would want to, but that would be an interesting circumstance. Tampa Bay, I'm not sure. I don't know if Todd Bowles is doing anything wrong so much because Tampa Bay's offense is the main reason why they're struggling. So maybe Brady retires and they go get another quarterback and they decide to give Bowles one more year. I kind of doubt either guy gets fired personally right now, though. So we've got a couple of obvious openings, and then we've got a maybe two maybes. And then the Lions are a maybe. And that only leaves the 8 teams in the AFC West and the NFC West. And we do have at least one super obvious opening here because the Broncos, barring a miracle turnaround, are moving on from Hackett at the end of the year. We know that. Hackett's getting fired. So that's an opening. But other than that, what else? I don't know. Not the Chiefs. The Raiders might, but they can't afford to. So I think McDaniels gets one more year. The Chargers will probably fire Staley if they miss the playoffs. Right now it looks like they're going to make the playoffs. If they don't, then yeah, he's gone. If they do, would they still fire him if they don't make a deep run? To me, it depends on whether or not they can get Sean Payton. If they can get Sean Payton, then maybe they fire Staley anyway. But either way, the point is, that's a team that is not going to be in the market for a Shane Waldron. They're going to be in the market for an established elite coach like Sean Payton. And I believe that if the Chargers move on from Staley, that is the most likely Sean Payton destination. So they're not going to be looking for Waldron anyway. NFC West, maybe McVay retires. He's certainly not getting fired. I don't think Shanahan gets fired, even though a lot of people talk about the possibility. I just don't think it happens. Maybe Cliff, but they just paid him. So I don't know if they want to go down that road. So you do have a handful of maybes, but generally speaking in the NFL, when you're talking about whether or not a team moves on from a coach and you say maybe, it means they won't. Because looking for a head coach is a headache. It costs money because you have to pay the old coach. It takes time. There's no guarantee of success. Sometimes the people who succeed or fail in the NFL at head coach almost feels random. Like, I'm really surprised by some of the people who flamed out as a head coach in the NFL. I thought Brandon Staley was going to be a really good coach. I liked what I saw in his resume, and for whatever reason, it's simply not working. But when you boil it all down, here's the end message. How many teams are actually going to be looking for a head coach at the end of the year? I say 1, Colts, 2, Panthers, 3, Broncos, and let's say there's going to be a fourth that is to be determined by how the season ends. Like maybe the Saints, maybe the Bucks, maybe the Texans, maybe the Chargers, maybe one of those teams goes for it, but not all of them and not most of them. So that's 4. Feels like the over-under on head coaching vacancies at the end of this year would be about, I would set it at 4.5. Right? Because you've got 3 pretty much locks. 2 are literal locks. 1 is basically a lock. And then you've got a bunch of other maybes. You're probably looking at about 4 to 5. One of those openings will probably be filled by Sean Payton. So will Waldron get picked up by one of the other hypothetical 3 or 4 openings? I am not convinced that his resume is enough. Here's the other question you have to ask yourself about this topic as well. Who else is going to be up for a head coaching job? We already talked about Sean Payton because he's kind of the big gun. But if you look around the league right now, try to find the other guys who may be up for a head coaching gig in 2023, you're going to find other names. And if there are only going to be 4 or 5 openings total, those spots are going to get filled pretty quickly. Let's go over some of the big names here. Outside of Shane Waldron, you have Dan Quinn. He's doing so well in Dallas, somebody's going to try to make him a head coach. He turned down the opportunity to become a head coach last year. He may not do it this year. So Dan Quinn is going to be a big one. You've got Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City. He's been waiting for an opportunity to become a head coach for a long time. Maybe this offseason is finally the time somebody brings him in. You've got Byron Leftwich in Tampa. Obviously, this year is not going very well, but we all understand there are extenuating circumstances. Leftwich was a guy who was getting offensive coordinator hype, head coaching hype as recently as last year. I don't think that's gone away. Shane Steichen with the Eagles. The Eagles offense is playing so well this year. Shane Steichen, and I'm probably mispronouncing that name, is also probably going to come up in a lot of head coaching conversations. Evero in Denver, what he's doing with that Denver defense that has a bunch of injuries, very impressive. He could be kind of like Brandon Staley was a couple years ago, where he has one big year as a DC and a team just says, all right, we're going to take him and hope he figures it out. You could absolutely see him getting a shot. Ken Dorsey over in Buffalo. Buffalo's offense is currently 3rd in the league. They haven't really lost that much since losing Daboll. Somebody in the chat told me his name is Daboll to the Giants. He's probably going to get a chance. And speaking of the Giants, you have a guy like Mike Kafka, who probably isn't ready yet, but that hasn't stopped teams before. So that's not even getting into a guy like DeMeco Ryans, who's on the 49ers staff. Now, that defense is going to probably have to have a strong finish for him to get a head coaching job, but DeMeco Ryans is absolutely going to be up for at least interviews, I believe. And little bit of a sleeper here, Brian Flores, currently sitting as a linebacker coach on the Steelers coaching staff, could be him as well. So I think there are probably way more people playing musical chairs this offseason than there are chairs. And when you look at Waldron, who was from the McVay tree, but has only had 2 years as a play caller or 2 years as an offensive coordinator, and only one of those years was good, is that more appealing than some of the other guys I just mentioned? I kind of don't think so. So I'm not that worried about Waldron leaving yet. If I thought there were going to be 7 to 9 openings this offseason, I would believe that statistically it was likely that he would leave. I would look at that and go, okay, how does he not get picked up by somebody? Somebody's going to pick him up. The odds are just too great. But as I look at it right now, it feels like there are going to be 4 or 5, and you've got Sean Payton, you've got Dan Quinn, and you've got some of the guys I mentioned that are waiting in the wings who have been waiting for forever, it seems like Eric Bieniemy, excuse me, to a certain extent, Mike Kafka. I know he's new to New York, but he's not new to being hyped as a potential head coach because he was attached to Andy Reid in Kansas City. Ken Dorsey is going to have a year that is probably going to be better, statistically at least, than what Waldron is doing. Granted, more talent, more ability, a better quarterback. But I think that Ken Dorsey is somebody who's going to come in there with a lot of hype. He's been hyped for a while now. So I could see it happening, but unless a bunch of people get fired, unless front offices and owners across the NFL decide to be super aggressive with turning over their coaching staffs this offseason, I don't think it happens. Statistically, I think it's unlikely. That's what I'm going to say, because any coaching opening could decide to pick up this guy or that guy, anybody who's available for a head coaching job, right? So we don't really have a great idea of who any one team is going to want. Now, we can assume certain things. Denver's not going to want Waldron, right? Denver's not going to want Waldron because that didn't work that well, and Waldron doesn't have skins on the wall anyway. They want somebody with skins on the wall so he can figure out this Wilson thing, not somebody who's going to have to learn on the fly. So I just don't really see it happening, but I do recognize it's on the table. It's definitely a worthy conversation to have. But at the end of the day, I think 2 years of experience, only one of those years being especially good, I don't think it's going to be enough. We'll see. It's possible. If it happens, I don't know what we do. I will admit that. I'm going to say that straight up. If it happens, I don't know what we do. Andy Dickerson will probably follow Waldron to wherever he goes, if that happens. So you can't promote Dickerson. And I guess you try to go get somebody who can run a similar offense, but who knows if you're going to be able to find that guy? Who knows if he'll be good? It's messy, which is why I don't want it to happen. And after breaking the situation down a little bit, I think I've come to the conclusion that it's unlikely to happen right now. But hey, maybe our offense ends up number 1 in the league by the end of the year and we win the Super Bowl. Then it'll happen. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think.